So on that slide, you can read the boring details about me. In real life, I'm a father, husband, Esperanto speaker, nerd. So that's me. So before I talk about accessibility, I wanted to say a few things about how we view accessibility here at Instructure. And actually before that, let me start out by saying if you folks have questions, feel free to just raise your hand and someone will bring you a microphone, or you can even just say your name. If you wait for me to call on you, you might be waiting a long time. So feel free to just speak up. So, there's quite a few ways for a company to deal with accessibility. The obvious one, and unfortunately the one that most companies seem to choose, is just to ignore it, but that's not worth discussing. The next one is to assume that, well, nobody's complained, so there probably isn't a problem, even though my contact form is behind a CAPTCHA and it's on an inaccessible website. And obviously we don't take that tack either. At Canvas, what we try to do is try to ensure that Canvas is not only possible for persons with disabilities to use, or really everyone to use, but also convenient to use, enjoyable to use. So if I might share a personal story, I attended community college in 2004, and I won't say which one, but their website, I suspect they were very proud of the accessibility of their website. They, by the standards, seem to be doing everything right by the standards of the day. They were using images for their links, so each link was a graphic, but they had them labeled in an accessible way. So each link, when you went to it, would say something along the lines of link. This is an image of some text that says registration. Click this link to go to the registration page. And then after all that, it would say register. So going anywhere on that site took a very long time. And so it was technically accessible, but not very usable. So anyway, at Canvas, we strive to be both accessible and usable. So how do we actually measure accessibility? We follow the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, version 2.0, level AA, and that's pretty much the industry standard for accessibility. And that is really our guide, at least for testing against, for compliance purposes. But again, we're usually more interested or just as interested in knowing whether or not it actually works for end users. Section 508, we also worry about that as well, as some of the some of our customers are concerned about that. And basically by complying with WCAG 2.0, it's widely believed that is, in almost all cases, covers you for Section 508. But again, we still do double check with 508 as well. Some other laws that we are aware of is the Americans with Disabilities Act and Section 504. As I understand it, and I'm certainly not a lawyer or an expert in legal theory, even around accessibility, but as I understand it, there's no formal particularly particularly with the ADA, and actually with the ADA there's some doubt as to whether or not it actually applies to the web. Courts have gone both ways. Most of the courts have gone on the side of it does apply, but so that's still unsettled. But again, we believe by being WCAG 2.0 compliant that we are meeting that requirement as well. So how do we find out what's wrong? How do we identify accessibility issues? The first way, and our first line of defense really, is to conduct internal accessibility reviews. So it's usually myself doing or involved in those, our quality assurance folks, our quality assurance engineers, and also Dana, who some of you may know from if you've discussed accessibility with us before. She's basically the manager and coordinator of all things accessibility. And when we're doing those reviews, we look for issues with screen readers, we look for contrast issues, issues with keyboard-only access, et cetera. So we try to cover all that in our internal reviews. We also conduct mini reviews. So when somebody makes a change to an interface component, our QA department, and sometimes myself, if it's a more complicated issue, we'll do a mini review on that code change. So that's our first lines of defense. After that, we depend on. Sorry, lost my place. So after that, we depend on various customers that we collaborate with, and they will often test our beta releases and let us know about any issues that they encounter that we might have missed. And if a bug is found at this point in the process, we consider it a failure on our part, because we like to identify as much as possible, before it even goes to beta. But fortunately, we do have those folks who help us out, and I'll talk more about that collaboration group and tell you how you can get involved if you're not already and if you're interested. And of course, the worst kind of bug is the one that's found in production, and obviously we try to avoid those as much as possible. But again, here is where we depend on our users to let us know about this, because something I may consider something accessible, but I'm just one screen reader user. What works for me, what's clear to me, may not necessarily be clear to everyone. And so, I don't want to be have the final say on what is and isn't working for somebody else. And so we greatly value that feedback. So let's talk about the collaboration group. So we primarily collaborate with a group called Athen, and so it's basically the Athen group is a loose collaboration between various schools. Mostly it's folks from offices for students with disabilities, and they share a lot of great information with us. They share with us if any of their users are running into pain points, and we get some extremely valuable feedback from them. So Athen is actually a more general group, though. They don't just work with Canvas. They work with a variety of vendors. The Athen collaboration, it takes place within a Canvas course, but we're not directing that. So it's basically directed by I'm trying to remember his name. It's an individual from the Terrell Thompson.
Terry Thompson and Ron Stewart.
Yes, thank you. I'm can't believe I couldn't remember that. But yes, from the University of Washington, I believe, and they do a great job. So if you're interested in joining that link on the slide, and I can share that with anyone who doesn't get that. That's the link to visit to find out how to join the group, and I'm sure anyone who's interested would be more than welcome to do so. So in the course, we generally use the discussion forums, and we talk about the different issues, and talk about, sometimes we'll share temporary workarounds, or other universities will share their temporary workarounds until we're able to get things fixed. We also have a monthly call where we discuss some of the more pressing issues, if there are any. And the collaboration with Athens has been extremely fruitful for us. As I've mentioned, we've got a great deal of very excellent feedback. It's nice for us to hear when we're doing something wrong, but it's also great to hear when we're doing something right as well. And in fact, we were invited to present at CSUN, which is, for those of you who don't know, it's a big accessibility conference that happens once a year. And we presented at CSUN with Athens, and they requested that we do so as an example of a successful collaboration. So we were really pleased by that invitation. And then the other plan of attack that we have to, excuse me, make sure that we actually are accessible, and it's not just us that think so, is we work with third-party reviewers, such as WebAIM, to have Canvas verified. They basically verify the accessibility of Canvas. And so this is the most recent accessibility statement that they issued to us, and we plan on renewing this every 6 months. And to be honest, sometimes having this is also just helpful for institutions that may not know as much about accessibility, and we can point to this third party and say, look, they think we're accessible also, so you don't just have to trust us. So let me talk about a little bit of the things we've done in terms of the accessibility. And some of these things are new. Most of them aren't. So I'll just run through these real quick. So there's an instructor can set the amount of time that a student has to take a quiz on an individual basis, which is obviously important for giving extra time to students who need that. We made it very easy. In fact, we created we modified the text editor in such a way so that when an instructor adds an image, they are prompted for a description. So it's not something that they have to remember to go do. It's right there in front of them. We also, the individual view gradebook, there's actually an interesting story behind that. So we generally avoid creating alternative interfaces for students with disabilities or for screen reader users. But we were redoing the gradebook. It was a couple of years ago, and we weren't sure how we were going to make the grid accessible. We had some ideas on how we could possibly do it, but it wasn't looking promising. So what we decided was, well, instead of giving them screen reader users a suboptimal solution, let's build an alternative solution. And we'll commit to keep it updated And so we built the gradebook and that was optimized for screen reader users, yet still have all the features of the main gradebook. And when we were about halfway through that, it was realized that, hey, this is actually pretty useful, irrespective of whether or not you're using a screen reader or not. And so we ultimately ended up making that generally available for everyone, and that's now what you have as the individual view gradebook. So that's a little bit of a story behind that. And I'm glad that we don't have to maintain an alternative interface because that can get messy and difficult. The last one is brand new, in fact, so new that it hasn't been released yet. But barring any unforeseen catastrophe, I expect to see this come out in the next beta release. And that is MathML support. So just very quickly for you, those of you who don't know, screen readers can read MathML, and they can actually present it in a nonlinear fashion. So they don't just read the equation from start to finish. They can do that as well. But they also allow users to go in and actually explore the equation or the mathematical expression. So they can go and look at the numerator and then go look at the denominator, and it makes it much more clear than just reading a long string of text. So that will be coming very soon. So I'm really excited about that, since I was a math minor in college, and so it's something that's important to me on a personal level. So these are things that will happen. We just don't know when. Some of these I would expect to come relatively soon. Others perhaps not. But hopefully all of these will come rather quickly. But it's hard to promise much when just based on the way we do our planning at Instructure. And many of these things are still in the exploratory phase. But so with that disclaimer out of the way, we want to add SVG output for equations. So right now, when you have an equation in Canvas, you get a GIF image of that equation. That's what you see. And the problem with that is that you can't zoom in if you're using magnification software, for example, without a loss of quality. And so we want to switch that out for a vector graphic, which can be enlarged as much as you want without losing quality. So we're working on that. We also want to add the ability to switch languages set the HTML language in the TinyMCE editor. So that, for example, if you're teaching a Spanish course, for example, and you want to, you add a passage that's in Spanish. Well, the screen reader doesn't have any way of knowing that, so what it will do is read the Spanish with a very, terrible accent, and it just doesn't work. So by marking that section of text with the language of whatever it happens to be, many screen readers will switch voices and use the proper pronunciation set. You can currently do that now in the HTML editor, but I don't know a lot of language instructors that are familiar with HTML or comfortable with it, although there certainly are more nowadays, I'm sure, than there were when I went to school, and I didn't go to school that long ago, but still, folks are more savvy than they used to be, obviously. But anyway, so we would make that easier. The next one, and this is also something I'm really excited about, is the addition of Markdown support in the editor. I think that's not just going to please users who require accessibility. I think it's going to be great for a lot of folks. So if anyone has any questions about what that is, I can explain further. But basically, it's a way to write it's a way to create rich text without taking your hands off the keyboard, basically. And you basically write in plain text, and that gets marked up with bold or whatever, italics or things of that nature. So, and then we also want to improve the accessibility of chat. Chat, I think it's okay. It's just it needs some enhancement. So that's it's mostly enhancements to chat. Let's see. So those are what we are planning on working on and comfortable talking about. So, in conclusion with what I have, I just want to say a little bit about, share with you some of these numbers. And to be honest, we're taking a bit of a risk by sharing these numbers. These are pretty big numbers. These show the number of accessibility issues that were addressed in each year. I mean, 375, that's a really big number for last year. As an engineer, I look at these numbers and I think, well, Canvas is a very complex system. So, this makes a lot of sense. This is a good thing. Because in any complex system, you are absolutely going to have bugs. And those bugs are going to need to be addressed, obviously. And so, I look at this as a positive thing, but I can see where, these numbers might appear as be somewhat off-putting to folks. And I think these numbers, or at least I hope these numbers show our commitment to enhancing the accessibility of Canvas, to continuously, work. Accessibility, I don't think, will ever be done simply because we won't ever be done making changes to Canvas, improvements to Canvas. So I think, I would expect them perhaps maybe to taper off a little bit, but, who knows? Other disclaimers I would add with these numbers is that many of these bug fixes, not all of them are bug fixes, but many of the ones that were addressed issues that nobody ever saw because we caught them on internal reviews, so they never hit beta. Or if they did hit beta, they were not released to production. The fix was applied before they hit production. Other of these fixes were also enhancements, so where a situation where something was accessible but inconvenient. And so we made it more convenient for screen reader users, or perhaps it was somewhat confusing, and we clarified it a little bit. But to be honest, some of these are just plain bugs, and that's the nature of working with a complex system such as Canvas, and that's why they hired me, I suppose. Does anyone have any questions? I'd love to.
Aaron, I have a question for you, Gary, over here.
Okay, and actually, you can wait for a microphone as well before asking your question. That would be great, just so we can get it on the video.
My question is that Canvas seems to be promoting the commons and the shared content.
Yes.
Right?
Yep.
Do you have a vetting process for reviewing for accessibility the content that's being posted to share with others, or some means of attributing its status so that potential sharers or consumers would know what you have?
So you're talking about content created by third parties, basically someone other than Canvas. Is that correct? Okay. Unfortunately, no, that would be a really big job. But it's a reasonable question. I just don't know that we would have the ability to do that. And so I don't know that we, I think the answer is no. As for your question about reporting the status, that is a very good question and a very good idea. If we had something in Canvas where at least the course creator could, report on the course's accessibility, or at least what they believed to be that, that might be actually something valuable. Is that what you were implying, or?
Yeah, essentially, I was assuming that if you were, as a consumer, you were looking at a collection of potential modules to adopt, not knowing whether or not they were accessible, would make a difference.
Right.
Because just as Canvas doesn't have the wherewithal to go through all of that content, a lot of the individuals wouldn't have the wherewithal
Right.
to make individual pieces accessible, but they know that their existing instance is accessible because you built it accessible.
Right. Yeah,
So
no,
I
that's
have,
a good point. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Dana. I just have a little comment about that. So typically, accessibility of content is the responsibility of the school. So it's not really, we would like to help, but it's not really within our
No, I wasn't suggesting
realm.
that you
Yeah.
were responsible for making it accessible.
There is a tool that a guy from UCF developed that's supposed to be him. And hopefully that's done and was going to be available to add into Canvas as a tool, and it would help with making course content accessible. So
Yes, I'm actually,
QA process so that others would know before they try to adopt or deconstruct.
what is the name of your tool?
it is, this is where, it's called You Do It, because you do it. And shameless plug, since you brought it up, my presentation is tomorrow at 2:30 in Arches. Yes, please go to that.
Excellent. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. I was working with a faculty member, a visually impaired faculty member, working with JAWS. And I got rather confused because in the stuff that I could just look for, it was saying that Canvas uses JAWS, but JAWS has to be used with IE. I know IE is supported by Canvas, but we find we have a lot of bugs. We don't encourage the use of
Right.
IE. We say E stands for evil. So we like to use Google. But I've worked with him using JAWS with Google, and there are issues.
Yeah.
So we have to, when I'm helping him develop a Webby course, Web Enhanced, for his face-to-face, we do have to use IE. But my concern is for any other student or faculty member using IE exclusively with JAWS, they're going to have some issues.
Yes.
Okay, I can
sorry, go
actually
ahead.
talk about this if you want, Aaron.
Oh, either way, or I can take it.
So there are only a few kind of versions of accessibility, like screen readers and browsers, that we can support, because if you do use IE with JAWS or you use Firefox with JAWS, depending on which browser you're using, you'll encounter different issues. And there's no way we can support every single browser screen reader combination. Typically in our testing, Chrome has not been accessible with screen readers. It typically promotes or responds with the most errors, so that we don't actually officially support any screen readers with Chrome.
In fact, Google themselves has said, don't use Chrome, use Firefox. I was told that by one of the developers of the NVDA screen reader. So, that's my citation for that source. So take it for what you will.
I do agree that IE is sad.
Yeah.
But the reason the reason we support IE in combination with JAWS and NVDA with Firefox, WebAIM puts out a study every year of screen reader users, and still the most frequently used browser is IE, like by a large amount still. So when that starts changing more, maybe we'll revisit that. But as long as IE is the most used browser, we'll support that in conjunction with the most used screen reader.
So I would suggest try Firefox if you at all can. I suspect you'll have a much better experience even with JAWS. While, and I want to be very careful to state that we do not officially support Firefox with JAWS. I personally use Firefox with JAWS. And Canvas works with that well. But again, you know, don't tell anyone. Somebody just posted it to Twitter, I'm sure, but nevertheless. So if at all possible, if you can try that, I suspect you'll have a better experience. Sure.
I think we have room for one more question.
Okay, I have one question. How has the accessibility team been involved in the new UI that was just announced?
It's gone through QA, but since it's mostly visual, Aaron hasn't been involved as much. But it's gone through QA, and as far as I know, it should still work with the automatic high contrast style setting we have. Once institutions start playing around and putting in their own colors, it's kind of out of our hands. But of course, the default should work.
Okay, so in terms of the underlying kind of code base with all these other fixes and things that you have delivered, that's not really changed?
It shouldn't change, and if there are bugs, like, I absolutely want to know.
Yes, so please tell us.
And
if
I
you
will
find
wage
anything.
that war.
But I don't anticipate, we don't anticipate anything.
Okay.
I can actually add
Thanks.
a little bit about that there.
Excellent.
Hi, I'm Jacob Fugel. I'm for one of the blah. Sorry, talking is hard. I'm the team lead for one of the developers that's been working on the new UI and particularly the theme editor. And one thing that we have made very explicit is that when you are using the high contrast styles, you will always get Canvas's styles. The themes that you may have set during the theme editor will be ignored when using high contrast styles. And that is particularly for this accessibility reason. Is that user-defined? Yeah.
Cool, so I think we're done. If anyone has some extra questions, we'll hang out in the lobby for a few minutes.
Yeah, we'll be around, so thank
And
you.
go to